Come all of you, come all of us, and bless the one who blesses. Come all of you, come all of us, and bless the one who blesses. Do-do-do, do-do-do.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed, Le'olam va'ed. Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שברחים גם יחד. 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 How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שברחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שברחים גם יחד. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שברחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שברחים גם יחד. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום. שלום עליכם, סלאם עליכום.
Oh, then I shouldn't have said all those things. That's a joke. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're thrilled to have so many of you here in our sanctuary. I think I know almost everybody here, but maybe for the couple who don't yet know me, I'm Rabbi Michael Friedman. Thrilled to have all of you here in person. And I know we have a number of folks on the live stream, so saying hello there as well. We're thrilled to have as our guest at Temple Israel this evening, Dr. Ken Pollock. Please give him a round of applause. Dr. Pollock's parents are here in the front row, and son, and they have been members of Temple Israel for a long time, a number of years. We don't have to say exactly how many, Anne. Okay, but a number of years. Ken didn't grow up here. This is like the family sort of weekend home that became their main home. Fair to say? Yes. Basically, Peter? Yeah. So Peter and Ann Pollack, thank you for helping us bring this event to fruition. Ken and I started talking about this event like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, something like that. And we, for various reasons that were convenient for your schedule and Temple's, we were like, okay, let's do it like in early May. Who knew that the timing would be so good? I would tell you, any time is an important time to talk about Iran and Israel and its role in the Middle East and Gulf countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we would have gotten a decent crowd, but we had no idea. Well, I had no idea. You probably,
of course
you
not.
knew. Of course you knew. Of course you knew. We had no idea just how current and relevant this conversation would be. Before I sit down, I do want to say just a few words about our guest this evening. Dr. Ken Pollock is Vice President for Policy at the Middle East Institute. He used to be, before that, he was at the American Enterprise Institute, and he was formerly affiliated with the Brookings Institution. If you can name a 3-letter federal security institution, he has worked for it. He's also served in the White House, and he's the author of 10 books, and he's an expert on Israel, Iran, the Gulf states, and the Middle East. Welcome, Dr. Ken Pollock.
Thank you so much for having me, Rabbi. It is wonderful to be with you.
We thought we would have a little conversation up here and then open it up to all of you. So, how did we get into this war?
That's a heck of a question. So first off, thank you so much for bringing me here. Thank all of you for coming. It's a real treat to be speaking at Temple Israel here in the Westport Weston community. I guess I should start a little ways back. I don't want to do too much of a history lesson, but it is worth.
Oh, I know these people. They want the history lesson, actually.
Okay, so we start with the first temple or the second temple. All right, let's start here. 2015, if you remember, Barack Obama negotiates a nuclear deal with the Iranians. We call it the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Not the world's greatest arms control agreement, but actually not bad. The Iranians are abiding by it. As you remember, President Trump, his first go round, campaigns against it, worst deal ever. 2018, pulls us out of the deal, imposes sanctions on Iran, but can't get a new deal, despite his best efforts. He leaves office, Joe Biden comes in, he too tries very, very hard to get a new deal with the Iranians. The Iranians are not interested. And there's an important reason why that's the case, important for understanding where we are now. At the time in 2015, when Obama struck the deal with the Iranians, as you, I think, all know, are deeply divided, right? It's a very fragmented polity, but we typically divide it up into pragmatists and hardliners. The hardliners had no interest in the nuclear deal. Their feeling about the nuclear deal was, one, they wanted a nuclear weapon, so they weren't interested in giving away the rights. And two, they felt that the deal was way too advantageous for the United States, not for Iran, which of course is what President Trump claimed. So when President Trump walked away, they were able to claim that they had predicted it all along. They had warned everyone, terrible deal, shouldn't get into it. The Americans are going to cheat, they're going to lie, and they're going to walk away from it, and they're going to leave us holding the bag, which is exactly what happened. So that gives them a very big boost. And that's important to understand because part of the story about how we got into this war is a story about how President Trump just doesn't understand the Iranians. And quite frankly, they don't understand him either. And it's this constant misunderstanding that's really gotten us to where we are. So he leaves office. President Biden can't get a deal either. He comes back into office, and the nuclear deal is this big unfulfilled promise on his part. And he wants that deal. He wants to be able to show the American people that he got a better deal than President Obama got. But he can't get it. Again, the Iranians are not interested. And of course, we go through the recent war. We haven't yet come up with a name for it, but the war that began on October 7, 2023 with the horrific Hamas attack on Israel. And of course, as you all know, eventually, Israel decided, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided that the war could not be complete without taking care of Iran as well. That ultimately Iran was behind Hamas and Hezbollah and the Hashd-e-Shaabi militias in Iraq and the Houthis, that at the end of the day, the Iranians were the head of the octopus and the war had to deal with them as well. And so June of last year, the Israelis attack Iran. President Trump joins in the war against them. The war hurts the Iranians pretty badly, really does wreck what was left of their nuclear program, which really wasn't very much because, as I said, the Iranians really were abiding by the nuclear deal. But nonetheless, what's left of it gets trashed. But at the end of it, if you remember, President Trump says, now you got to sign a deal with me. Okay? And the Iranians don't. Because once again, the war plays into the hands of Iran's hardliners, who keep predicting that the United States is going to lie, cheat, betray them, and Iran is going to wind up with the short end of the stick. And that keeps getting proven correct. And so all through the fall of last year, the Trump administration has put down this marker that the Iranians need to sign a new deal with us, and the Iranians have no interest in doing so. Okay. Now, of course, as you also know, the Israelis had begun that 12-day war in June. They did it to try to destroy not just what was left of Iran's nuclear program, but also its ballistic missile program, which was producing thousands of ballistic missiles with the range to hit Israel. It's a real threat to Israel. And President Trump had shut down the war before the Israelis had done all of the damage that they wanted to the ballistic missile program. And so all through the fall, the Israelis are also thinking, we've got unfinished business with the Iranians. And these two things kind of come together in December, January, where the Israelis are saying to President Trump, look, we need to take care of the Iranians. They're rebuilding their ballistic missile program. We never finished them off. And you've got unfinished business with them as well with the nuclear program. And if you remember, around December or so, President Trump started to focus on Iran again, and in particular after the Venezuela operation, which had gone so brilliantly for the United States. He began asking the question of, okay, what can we do to the Iranians? Can we do something to the Iranians that'll force them to make the deal that I keep insisting on, that I have promised the American people? Obviously, very important for him going into the 2026 elections. He wanted to actually have that deal. And then in January, December, really late December, the Iranian people once again rise up against their government, try to overthrow it. And if you remember, President Trump announces that help is on the way. Right? He's basically saying to the Iranians, I'm going to come to your assistance. But he finds out from his military advisors that actually we haven't got the forces in the region to be able to provide any assistance. And so that kind of gets shunted aside. But that brings us up into this kind of January, February timeframe where all of this is coming together for the administration. The Israelis want to hit Iran because as far as they're concerned, the ballistic missile program is still hanging out there like a sword of Damocles over their heads. And they'd really like, first, they want Trump's permission to do it, right? He shut things down in June, so they know they've got to get him on board with that. And what's more, they'd really like our help, right? Israel is a very formidable military, but it can't hold a candle to what we can do. And so if the Israelis can fight the war with us, far better for them, far more effective for them. Trump, too, is thinking about Iran. He wants that deal. And he's also thinking, Venezuela went so great. Isn't there some way I can do something in Iran? And where it all really comes together is that Israeli intelligence and American intelligence come up with some brilliant insights that allow them to go to President Trump in early February and say to him collectively, we know where Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, is going to be on a certain day. And we know where the military and internal security leadership of the Iranian military and internal security forces, where they're going to be on that same day. And we can kill all of them. And that creates an opportunity that was incredibly enticing to President Trump. Okay, but there's one last piece of the story that I got to tell you, which is that while this is certainly something that President Trump is thinking about because you've got this convergence, he's not entirely sure. He isn't really sure what he is going to do. And for 3 weeks, he waffles. He goes back and forth among different options. Do I kill the entire Iranian leadership and try for actual regime change, bring about a revolution in Iran? This is the help that I promised the Iranian people. Or do I go for something smaller? Do I hit the Iranians in some of their important ballistic missile facilities to try to coerce them into making the deal that I've wanted all along? And for most of the month of February, he goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And what's important about that is the U.S. military was not sure what he was going to do until the day he gave the order to go ahead, kill Khamenei, kill the leadership, and we're going to try for regime change. And that's important because they thought they had longer. Some of you may remember, we start the war on February 28th. It's a Friday night. The following Thursday, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were supposed to be meeting with the Iranian foreign minister again to do another round of negotiations. The Iranians expected that we would actually do that. So did the U.S. military. So they thought that they had at least another week to prepare for this, and they didn't think he was going to do the big, let's go for regime change. They thought we would do something smaller, which meant that the Iranian response that they would have to prepare for was also going to be smaller. And that was what they really were expecting. And so when the president said, nope, we're going to do it now, a week early, and we're going to go for the whole enchilada, let's try for regime change, because that would be like Venezuela, it badly wrong-footed the U.S. military. And once again, what it also did was by killing Ayatollah Khamenei, and please don't get me, Ayatollah Khamenei was a monstrous human being, right? Awful person, horrible to his own people, to Israel, to the rest of the people of the Middle East, to the people of the United States. But he was a very conservative, small c leader of Iran. Very frightened of the United States, always, whenever we hit him, he had tremendous respect, and he would always under-respond. He wanted to always do less. But the problem was those hardliners, right? They always wanted to do more. And when we killed Ayatollah Khamenei, first the signal we sent was, we're doing regime change, right? So you guys, you're all dead if this thing works. They have no reason to be restrained. Plus, we eliminated the one great figure of restraint in the entire Iranian system. The one person with the stature to stand up to the hardliners, to the Revolutionary Guard, and say, we're not going to launch everything. We're going to be much more restrained. We're going to just try to survive this, right? So we've created the circumstances where the bad guys are in charge, and what we've said to them is, we're coming for all of you, right? You're cornered. You got no choice but to fight us with everything you've got. And that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are.
And so most of what you say, Ken, is from the American perspective.
Right.
Can you say more about the Israeli perspective? My understanding through everything I've read and heard is that the Israeli effort was much more deliberate and planful. We know that Israel's been planning this for years, if not decades, and that there was much more alignment between the political and military leadership in Israel. So can you share
absolutely.
your perspective on all that?
And Michael, you've nailed it, right? You've got the framework there. The Israeli side is very different. For the Israelis, there is a clear threat. The threat is imminent. It's the threat of Iran's ballistic missiles. But yes, they also want to take care of whatever is left of the Iranian nuclear program. The truth of the matter is that for Israel, regime change is kind of an unalloyed good, right? For the United States, it can be problematic in a whole variety of ways, as we now see, including because it triggered the Iranians to retaliate in ways that have been very, very problematic for us that just aren't for the Israelis. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely correct. For the Israelis, again, they wanted to take out the ballistic missile program, they wanted to get rid of whatever was left of the nuclear program, and they wanted very much to see if they could bring about regime change altogether. And from their perspective, this whole operation makes perfect sense. Right, from their perspective, if they can get regime change that brings to power a new Iranian government that wants to have a better relationship with Israel, fantastic, right? That's a giant win for them. But even if that doesn't happen, and there's chaos in Iran, something that would be horrible for the United States because of the impact it would have on our allies, on global oil, etc., the Israelis is not a problem at all, right? They get a government that is no longer threatening to them. That's still a win. And even if neither of those things happen and they don't get rid of the Iranian regime at all, they still get to mow the grass with the great American superpower, right? Much more effective to mow the grass with us than without us. But that's also important to recognize, right? Israel thinks about its wars in a completely different fashion from the United States. Israel was born in battle, and they have been in battle every day since. And especially since October 7, 2023, that's how Israelis, I know you've been there, I've been there as well since October 7th. That is how Israelis are conceiving of things, is we are just going to have to fight every single day of our lives. But again, better to fight with the Americans and better to fight on their soil than on our soil. Right? It's a reversion to the original strategic doctrine of Israel of, we preempt, we go on the offensive, we fight there, because if we fight in Israel, too many of our own people will be killed, as they saw on October 7th. But that's a completely different approach to war fighting from the United States.
So how should we assess the success or lack thereof of this war for each side? Israel with its more clearly defined goals, and the United States with its less clearly defined goals. How can we think about to what degree this war was a success for Israel and for the United States?
Yeah, again, great question. So for the Israelis, there's no question that this has already been a great success. And the only question for them is how successful is it going to wind up being? Again, they have already succeeded in mowing the grass. They've done tremendous damage to Iran's ballistic missile program. Far, far greater damage than what they did back in June. They've done tremendous damage along with us, right? We've destroyed Iran's Air Force. We've destroyed their Navy. Either was terribly meaningful, but good to have it gone. They've also been systematically going after the barracks and vehicle parks and arsenals of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the other internal security forces in the hope that this will either spur another revolt against the regime and maybe even make one successful, but even if that doesn't work, that it will be terrifying to the regime and will serve as something more of a deterrent in the future to give them a second thought about whether or not they should come after Israel again. So they've already accomplished a tremendous amount, but as far as they're concerned, there's still lots more that they could do. They're glad to do it, but again, they'd like to do it with us. I guess I should say something about the U.S.
Oh, I guess so, yes.
Apologies,
sure.
Right, I stuck to Israel there, burying the lead. So on the U.S. side, the right answer there, and it is a very important contrast, is too soon to tell. Right? We just don't know yet. Again, we've done a lot of damage to the Iranians, and that's not a bad thing. And look, this air campaign, this whole military campaign, has been pretty brilliant, right? Our military is really good at what they do. And as an old military analyst, I kind of sit there, it's like, damn, you guys are good, right? They really think this stuff through. And again, the one problem that they had was that President Trump badly wrong-footed them, went sooner than they were expecting, much bigger than they were expecting. But if you can take that out of the equation, and strategically you can't, but in terms of military tactically, absolutely brilliant. The problem is that, again, going back to what I was talking about beforehand, by killing Ayatollah Khamenei, and we also killed the other great pragmatist out there, Ali Larijani, right? We remove the only two figures in the system who are willing to compromise, who care about the Iranian economy, the Iranian people, with the authority to do something about it. We have put the worst of Iran's hardliners in charge. And we've also taught them a terrible lesson. Right? If you had brought me up here 6 months ago when we first started talking about this, and you had said to me, would the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz? My response would have been no. They would never touch the Strait of Hormuz except if we were invading Iran, mounting a major regime change effort in Iran, because they know that if they screw around with the Strait of Hormuz, we would go for regime change. Right? And that was always their thinking. And they never touched the Strait of Hormuz for exactly that reason, that they were afraid that if they shut the Strait of Hormuz, we would decide this government is beyond the pale, and we would be coming for them, and the whole world would be behind us, and it would be all over, be lights out for them. Unfortunately, what we've now taught them is you can close the Strait of Hormuz, and not only will that not cause us to go for regime change, in fact, it causes us to back off from regime change. Right? That was a terrible lesson to teach this group of people. And so, where we are now is, we've done all this damage to them, but they feel like, we kind of both have our hands around each other's throats. Right? We've got a blockade on them. They're blockading. They're shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. And the question is, who's going to choke or cry uncle first? And the problem with these guys, as I said, is they don't care about Iran's economy. Right? This is the group who, all through the Iran-Iraq War, they want to just keep on fighting. Famously, Ayatollah Khomeini didn't care about the Iran economy. They also don't really care about the Iranian people, because their feeling is anyone who revolts against us is a traitor, and we'll kill them. And we will kill as many people as we need to stay in power. And we demonstrated that back in January when they killed thousands, if not tens of thousands. Nobody really knows the answer to it. So as I said, right now, we've done a lot of damage to them, but they feel like they're in an advantageous position. And nobody knows how this thing is going to end.
So one of the lessons that we haven't touched upon yet of the war seems to me to be the asymmetry of power, by which I mean that Iran has learned that it can cause tremendous havoc with relatively low-tech and inexpensive weapons. Some guy in a fishing boat who can plant mines in the strait, or a $10,000 drone that it can fly over to the UAE, or something like that. And who needs an air force? Who needs a navy when those types of weapons can cause great damage? And of course, our, and I'll say our being Israel and also the United States, our only response is very expensive high-tech weapons, i.e. missile defense systems, where each missile costs millions of dollars to defend us, to defend Dubai, to defend us being Israel, et cetera, defend Dubai, et cetera. So can you speak a little bit, Ken, about the asymmetry that's been exposed in military power here?
So unfortunately, Michael, I can speak a lot about that. And what's going to be hard is such a great question. Again, I'm an old military analyst. The hard part is going to be limiting myself. So let me make just 3 points that I think everybody in the audience will appreciate in some way. And the rest, if you want to, later on, we can go for a beer, and I will tell you all about the asymmetries.
Love it. Love it.
Okay, so point number one is you're absolutely right. We're seeing this, and what we should recognize is it's about the changing nature of warfare, but it's also about the changes in our society, right? We're shifting from an industrial age to an information age. And whenever you have these kinds of epochal shifts, you get major changes in weaponry technology, which cause major changes in warfare. And what happens is that it scrambles everything, right? So as you point out, what we're seeing now is a migration of weaponry in two directions simultaneously. So simultaneously toward incredibly cheap weapons, right? These drones that in particular the Ukrainians have been phenomenal at manufacturing, where they're literally taking child's toys and turning them into lethal weapons of war, right? And then at the other end of the spectrum, this move toward unbelievably expensive systems, right? The interceptors that we've been using to shoot down the drones, the ballistic missiles, but our F-35, the F-35, the main fighter aircraft that we and the Israelis have been using, which is just a mind-bogglingly brilliant aircraft, but it costs a fortune, right? An absolute fortune. And both are problematic, right? The cost of the weapon system is daunting for all of us, and you don't want to use too many of them. And as you were kind of alluding to, everyone's afraid that we're going to be running out of these brilliant weapons long before the Iranians run out of these really dumb systems out there. But these dumb systems are also really important, and the combination of the two, it makes it very, very hard to know who's strong and who's weak. And I actually wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, where I said, look, these changes in warfare are going to badly destabilize the Middle East. Because the most important, I know it sounds strange, who knew that the Middle East was stable?
Right, exactly.
Right? But trust me, it was actually stable for many, many years, because after 1973, pretty much everyone understood that the Israelis and Americans were far too strong to attack, right? The only people who didn't understand it were morons like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. It took them a while longer to figure it out, right? And they ultimately paid for their lives. But all the other Arab states, and frankly the Iranians too, figured this out, right? And it meant we didn't have conventional wars in the region. And when I wrote that piece in 2020, 2021, whatever it was, I said, listen, because of these changes, it's going to be very, very hard for people to know who's strong and who's weak. And that's going to make people try things that they wouldn't have tried beforehand. And I would say October 7, 2023 was a big response to that. Hamas thought it could do things that it couldn't. Iran thought it could do things that it couldn't. They didn't realize, they thought they were stronger than they were. They thought Israel was weaker than it was. And that's how you get into the war.
And vice versa.
Exactly.
Israel thought Hamas was much weaker than it really was.
Exactly.
Right.
But so this is one of the problems we have going forward, is that it's going to be very, very hard to know who's strong and who's weak. And just the last point to kind of bring it back around, you can look at the war now and say, wow, the Iranians have done so much damage with these incredibly cheap weapons. And that's a true statement. But you can also look at it and say, wow, look at what the US and Israel and our allies have done with these incredibly expensive systems, right? The Emiratis have shot down, the number that we typically use is 92% of everything thrown at them. But when these systems are really smart, so they can tell when a missile or a drone is not going to hit something important, and they won't engage it for that reason. So when you take out all of the stuff that was going into the sea or the desert, the kill rate, the hit rate was actually 99%. Right? So it's like, on the one hand, okay, these things are really expensive, but man, they work incredibly well. This other stuff is really cheap, doesn't work as well, but man, you can buy a lot of it and you can hide it, and it can cause people fits.
Totally. You mentioned the Emiratis, so let's access your expertise in the Gulf states. Can you speak a little bit about how the impact the war has had on them, both today and going forward?
Yeah, another really important
Small topic, another small topic.
Exactly. So again, let me see if I can keep it to just a few points.
You've done well.
I'm trying. All right, so point number one, no one is more pissed off about this war than the Gulf states. They told the United States, don't do this. It's not going to work out the way that you think it is. They tried to prevent us from doing it, right? Famously, they forbade us from using the bases in their territory. We did it anyway. It didn't work the way that President Trump thought it would work. To make things worse, they then get hit by the Iranians. And by the way, they're pissed at us. They're pissed at the Iranians too. I was talking to some very senior officials from the United Arab Emirates, and they were saying that Ali Larijani, arguably the number 2 man in Iran before the Israelis killed him, was in the Emirates, was in Abu Dhabi the week before the war began. And the Emirati said to him, if we're telling the Americans not to do this, we're forbidding the Americans from using our bases to attack you. If the Americans do it, it's not going to be with our participation in any way, shape, or form. And Larijani said, that's great to hear. Yes, 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 thank you. And then, of course, the moment that the war starts, they start hitting the Emirates. So as far as the Emirates are concerned, they've gotten the short end of the straw, I'll put it that way, from the Americans, the short end of the straw from the Iranians. And of course, all the Gulf states have, but nobody worse than the Emiratis. And think about it from their perspective. The Strait of Hormuz is shut down, right? It prevents them from exporting their oil, which is the source of all their wealth. But also remember, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz shuts down all of the imports into the Emirates. So they're now getting worried about food and medicine and everything else that they have to import. And again, they have huge stockpiles and they can get some of it overland trucked from Saudi Arabia, but nothing like what they're used to. So that is also a very big problem. They're very nervous about what President Trump is going to agree to. Right? The Iranians now are, I'm sure you read newspapers, the Iranians are demanding, you want us to reopen the strait? Fine. There's going to be a toll on ships going through the strait. Right? Who's going to pay that toll? The Emiratis, the Qataris, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, right? Because they rely on the strait for everything. The Iranians are demanding reparations, which we'll certainly have to pay, at least in Iran's mind, but so too will the Gulf states, right? The Iranians are already coming to them and saying, you want us to open the strait? Fine. $2 a barrel of oil exports, plus you're going to pay us tens of billions of dollars every year to not launch drones and ballistic missiles at you, right? And so the Emirates and the other countries, the other Gulf states are looking at this and saying, if the Americans aren't willing to win this war, right, we're going to have to make this deal with the Iranians, which is going to put us, we're going to be extorted by the Iranians on a regular basis. They're just going to keep coming back to us for more and more and more money. And look, at the end of the day, they've got a lot of money. So if the Iranians demand $25 billion, $50 billion from the Emirates will pay it. But the problem is the Iranians will then use that money and the money they get from Kuwait and the money they get from Saudi Arabia and the money they get from Qatar to build ballistic missiles and drones and nuclear weapons and all of their proxies and allies out there. And in the past, they've tried to undermine the governments of the Gulf states. This is what they're looking at. So from their perspective, this war has been an unmitigated disaster.
Okay, I have one more question.
Okay.
And then we'll open it up to all of you. The U.S.-Israel relationship is very important. I fear that this war has had some pretty difficult impacts on the U.S.-Israel relationship in both political parties. So can you tell us about the future of American support for Israel based on your view of Washington's politics at this point?
So my glib answer is, oi. Now I'll give you a somewhat more involved, balanced answer, which is to say, I don't think we know yet. I think it is still very much up in the air. I mean, look, there's no question that so far it's not been helpful, right? There is this narrative on both the far left and the far right that this was Israel's war, that they roped us into this, that they somehow forced President Trump or duped President Trump into doing this, and that we're simply fighting on their behalf. And that's not correct. The problem is that there is a kernel of truth to it. As I said to you, Prime Minister Netanyahu absolutely wanted this war and absolutely put down intelligence in front of President Trump and a plan that President Trump bought into. Right? That is absolutely true. And the threat to Israel was clear. The threat to us was unclear, to say the least. That is also true. What, of course, all that leaves out is the fact that, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been trying to do this basically since the Bush 43 administration, right? He's been in there pitching on a monthly basis, right, trying to get U.S. presidents to go to war with him against Iran. And President Bush said no, and President Obama said no. President Trump in his first term said no. President Biden said no. So the fact that it happened this time around isn't on Israel, right? They've been very consistent in trying to do this. They have their rationale, again, from Prime Minister Netanyahu's perspective, and quite frankly, from the perspective of most Israelis, right? This makes eminent sense for them. And they've been very clear in what their strategic rationale, their strategic need. They've certainly been trying to persuade the United States. But the change here is not about Israel. The change is about President Trump. Now, all that said, and again, we all know the far left, the far right are just running rampant with this, running riot with this. And right now, this is not helpful to the U.S.-Israel relationship. But as I said, I think that how the war ends is going to matter a lot to it. Because if the war ends and Americans can look at the situation and say, this is better than it was on February 27th, 2026. Iran has been badly weakened. They know that they should not try to take on the United States. They know that their hardliners led them into a terrible situation. The United States and Israel have once again demonstrated not just their capability to win militarily, but their ability to create a better set of political circumstances afterwards. And we should always remember, that's what war is about. The purpose of war is not to defeat your enemy. The purpose of war is to create a better peace afterwards. Right? Defeating your enemy is just a typically important step on the road to that, right? But this is what the great philosopher of war, Karl von Clausewitz, kept trying to explain to people, is it's not about beating your enemy. In fact, we can all point to wars where the country that lost all the battles still won the war. Right? So that's what we have to think about, is when this is over, are we in a better situation politically? Mm-hmm. If that's the case, then I think that we can do a lot of repair work. Right? And I think that a lot of Americans will say, okay, we didn't really understand it at the time, but now we can see it. And yes, the war was worth fighting, and we came out of it in a better situation than when we went in.
Great, appreciate that. Okay, now we're happy to open it up. I had a handheld mic here somewhere, or Sean has it in the back. So we'll just ask that you use the microphone both so that people in the room can hear and so folks on the live stream can hear. Happy to give you the first question.
What I don't understand is why do the other Gulf countries not rise up against Iran, and since they're hurting them?
Sure. So the question was, for those of you who couldn't hear it, is why don't the Gulf states rise up, join us in the fight against Iran, given how much the Iranians are hurting them? Great question. Two answers. First, they really don't have very significant military capabilities, right? The truth of the matter is the Emiratis definitely have some forces that could be helpful to us, but most of their militaries are pretty pathetic. And we really don't need their help, and in some cases we don't want their help. You guys may remember that the first losses that we suffered were 3 American F-15s shot down by the Kuwaitis, not the Iranians. right? And that was one of those like, yeah, why did we tell the Kuwaitis to turn on their Patriots? Would have been so much better to just have them keep them off because they do a lot of damage. They're just not very effective. The other issue for them is that there's still a great deal of ambivalence on their part about where they want this thing to come out, right? They want the Iranian regime gone. There is no question about that. And they keep saying to Trump, do not stop this war until the Iranian regime is gone, right? Don't make us live with this Iranian regime afterwards because it's going to be horrible for us. But they're not sure that that's going to be the reality. As I said, they're very concerned that President Trump is no longer interested in regime change, I think understandably. At this point in time, regime change would probably require an invasion of Iran, and there's no way he's doing that. So they got to think about, we're going to have to live with this regime moving forward, and if we've contributed to the war, that's going to make things worse for us. In addition, remember, only Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates have relations with Israel. So fighting in a war alongside Israel is very problematic for them in terms of their own domestic publics, right, who would be very unhappy about that. And again, since we don't need them to be participating, and again, it's problematic for them in all these political ways, right now everyone's feeling is, you guys can sit this one out, we don't need your help, we'll take care of this on our own.
I'm just going to go here, Cheryl, and then Brad. And do you want to take one question at a time? Some people like to take a couple questions at a time.
However you want to do it.
Okay.
Maybe the answer won't be dissimilar to what you were saying about the Gulf states, but how does Europe factor into this, since we keep hearing they should be more involved, they have their sources of oil and fertilizer and stuff more than we do? So.
Sure. Great. So let me start with the last part because it's actually an important point, which is this whole we rely on it more, they rely on it more. This is all nonsense, okay? It's a global oil market, right? It will hit us a little bit later, but it'll hit us just the same. Most important thing to understand, people constantly say, well, we export more oil than we import. That is true, but people don't understand what that means. I'll put it this way. We produce 13.4 million barrels of oil per day, the number one producer in the world. But we consume 19.1 billion barrels per day, okay? So we're still getting 5.6, 5.7 million barrels per day on the oil market, right? So we're still importing, which makes us completely dependent on international oil, which makes us dependent on the price of oil. So point number one is we're all in it together. And this whole we, they is all nonsense, right? And think of it this way. Even if somehow we could produce 19.1 and consume 19.1, right? All of our trade partners are similarly exposed, and our GDP is about 25, 27% based on trade. So if our trade partners' economies collapse, ours collapses too because of the impact on our trade. So point number one, we're all in it together. Now, back to your question about Europe. So the European perspective on this is Donald Trump has done everything he possibly can to alienate them. And by the way, a little disclaimer. I work, as you heard from the rabbi, I work at a place called the Middle East Institute. We are the only truly nonpartisan think tank that focuses on the Middle East in Washington, D.C., right? And we take that very, very seriously. So this is not a partisan thing about Republican, Democrat. You want me to say nasty things about Barack Obama, I can stay here all night saying nasty things about his Middle East policy. But it is a simple fact that the Europeans are absolutely fit to be tied at how President Trump has treated them. The whole Greenland thing and Denmark and repeatedly threatening to pull out of NATO, and the way that he has handled the Ukraine war, which, the Ukraine war is critical to European defense, and the way that he has, made the Ukrainians beg for things and flirted with Putin, and then again dissed them on every single issue, including on this war, right? Going to war without any consultations with them, a war that is going to have an enormous impact on their economies as well. He didn't even bother to let them know that he was going to do it, right? And of course, even in the run-up, they were saying, please don't attack Iran. He did it anyway. And then, of course, he goes to them and says, now you've got to help me. And again, well, we don't need you because you people are useless, and you got to help us because this is your oil. It has left such a bad taste in the mouths of European leaders and their publics, right? And we should recognize that. These are all democracies, and their publics are furious at the United States and want no part in this war. And that is problematic because, going back to my early conversation with the rabbi about how this war got started, so one of the other things that you need to understand is that the U.S. Navy hates mine clearing, hates it. Not fun, not glorious, right? What they like to do is they like to sink enemy ships and, destroy enemy, military equipment. That's this kind of stuff that they like. And pretty much after every single war, going back to World War I, the U.S. Navy has systematically eliminated its own minesweeping capability, right? We get into a war, we need it, so we build it up, and then after the war, the Navy destroys it. And what the Navy came up with in the 1980s and 90s, really clever on their part, we're not going to do minesweeping at all. We're going to give that to our European allies. And our European allies are like, great, we can do that, right? Minesweepers are small, cheap ships. We can afford that. And it's all made sense, right? The United States, we're going to build aircraft carriers and attack submarines, right? We're going to do all the sexy stuff. And yeah, you Europeans, you can do all the minesweeping. Now, we don't have any minesweepers, right? The Europeans have all the minesweepers, right? There was supposed to be a division of labor there. Again, it made perfect sense. But the one key was you couldn't piss off the Europeans so that they wouldn't send the minesweepers. But that's where we are.
Okay. Brad and then Annette. And then I'll go over that side.
I'll keep it as brief as I can because I have more questions than you can take beers. The prime question I have for you, as you are an expert in the area, is regarding the Qataris. The Qataris have shown very different sides during the war and the peri-war period. They are clearly very concerned about South Pars and maintaining their income from gas stands that they share with Iran. However, after being bombed or missiled a number of times, they have made some serious angry gestures, I would say, towards the Iranians, including kicking out the Hamas billionaires. There is lots of reporting in the United States, of which I don't think a single American actually knows what the truth is, about what the Qataris are doing in our elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges. If you look at the numbers in terms of the donations they've made to places like Colombia, they are billions after billions after billions. And the first thing that they did, that the colleges did, was to close all of the campuses in the Gulf states. And now there's talk of there actually being congressional hearings on the Qataris, but nobody's really discussing it. Where do you think the war will leave the Qataris? Where do you think Hamas is going to go? Are they headed for Erdogan? Are they more powerful, less powerful, more Israelophilic? That's number one.
That's only number one?
Quick,
oh my
you
God.
said more than one. Other quick question, and it's a much shorter one, is are you actually considering the fact that the Iranians long-term, with their fast boats, could control the strait and collect tariffs from all the other Gulf states and all of the major transport vessels and oil vessels going forward? Would they be shooting missiles at the... I don't understand how they could even do that long term.
Sure. So let me take them in turn. And first, I share your frustration with the Qataris and your hope that this war is going to require a major about-face in their geostrategic approach. So this is the problem, right? As you pointed out, the Qataris, and look, all of the Gulf states, when President Trump came back into office, I'll say, when President Trump, at the end of his first term, when he left office, there was a lot of unhappiness in the Gulf about him, right? And the Gulf states, and here in particular the Saudis and the Emiratis, what they would say is, he talked the talk, but he didn't walk the walk, right? He never backed up anything that he said. He made all kinds of promises to us, and then he walked away from them. And it's worth remembering, in 2019, the Iranians started attacking Saudi and Emirati oil exports. First going after tankers in the Gulf, and President Trump did nothing. And it was so shocking to the Iranians that they escalated and attacked these massive Saudi facilities, in particular at a place called Abqaiq in Saudi Arabia, which, if the global economy has a beating heart, it is Abqaiq, Saudi Arabia. 70% of all Saudi oil flows into Abqaiq and then flows back out. And the attack was horrific. And again, President Trump did nothing, right? And that was terrifying to all of the Gulf states. And so they came out of it, really not at all happy. When he came back into office, all of them, including the Qataris, came up with this strategy of, we're going to bribe and flatter him, right? That's what works with him. And it's very clear that they've realized that that doesn't necessarily work. But as you pointed out, the Qataris have showered him with praise and benefits, including a brand new 747. And, why have there not been congressional hearings? I can't say for certain, but that would be a place I would look at, right? That would be something that I would be certainly considering. My great hope is that look, there's no question the Qataris were shocked that they got attacked by the Iranians too. And they do talk about things differently. And my hope is that they are going to realize that before this, their policy before this had been a terrible mistake. And that, casting their lot with the Iranians and Hamas and all these other, horrible actors did not buy them any forbearance, right? They got caught up in it. They got attacked just like everybody else. And in truth, the one country that really came to their defense in this case was actually the United States. And by the way, worth noting, the Emirates are saying that out loud. And what they're saying is not just the United States, they're saying it is Israel who came to our defense. No one came through for us the way that the Israelis did, right? And that's actually it. It's right. That's one of the things that the Israelis did for them. And I was hearing this before that came out in the news, that the Israelis really stepped up for them. And that's been hugely important.
They actually sent soldiers.
Correct, to man the Iron Dome, right? And again, I am told there are other things that they did that nobody is talking about yet.
I have one more question over here, and then we'll go into that side.
So I have a couple of questions. The enriched uranium, I haven't heard anything about that. If you can talk about that Iran has. And also, it's a little frightening to know that Trump has been on the phone with Putin a lot lately. And Russia obviously is benefiting from this. So I wanted you to speak about that, and also where China is in terms of this.
Sure. So I'll see if I can knock them down quickly. So uranium, it's buried, right? Nobody knows for certain where it is, but everyone seems to think that it's buried in the 3 sites that we bombed back in June. Now, again, the problem there is there was no indication that the Iranians were digging it up. So again, it gets to this question of how can you justify this as being some kind of a threat when all the indications, including from the IAEA, is it's still buried. But I'll go back to the point that I made a little bit earlier, but I kind of made it in passing, so I'm going to make it a little bit more directly now. What we have in charge in Tehran are the group of people who always wanted the nuclear weapon, who didn't want to sign the nuclear deal with Obama because they wanted the nuclear weapon, who don't really care about the Iranian economy, by and large, who are willing to kill as many Iranians as they have to stay in power. And everything that we know about them is that the way that they read both the Israeli strikes in April of 2024 and October of 2024, and then the 12-day war in 2025, is that they all read that as the only way to prevent repeated American and Israeli strikes is to have a nuclear weapon, right? So they have every incentive to get a nuclear weapon. And the problem with the uranium, the enriched uranium, is, again, it's buried. So, people have talked about doing this cockamamie commando raid to kind of get at it. But, as some people have pointed out, you'd have to dig the stuff up, right? And the stuff is highly radioactive. Nobody knows if the containers are still intact, right? Trying to fly into Iran and extract this stuff would be an absolute disaster. Right? So that almost certainly is not going to happen. The only way you're going to be able to deal with that is with a new deal with the Iranians, which is going to require trade-offs to get it. Putin, he's not helpful, right? Not at all. There's nothing about what he is doing that is good for us or anybody that we care about. But Trump and he have this strange relationship that no one really understands. I don't know exactly what he is up to. I have to imagine that Trump is saying to him, I need your help with the Iranians. The Iranians, they're your allies. He's providing them with all kinds of assistance. You got to get the Iranians to come around. And the question really becomes, when Putin then says, okay, well, here's what you got to do, is he asking for concessions from the United States to Iran or concessions from the United States to Russia? I'm not in favor of either, but that's the big question I have in my mind, is, who is Putin actually working for? The Iranians, himself? Either way, he's not working on behalf of the United States. And, as you pointed out, he has nothing really to lose in this situation. He has only stuff to gain, right? This war has been a huge boon for him. China, very different, right? For the Chinese, this war has not been good. The Chinese want stability in the Gulf. They do get a lot of oil. They are dependent on the international oil market. In addition, the Chinese, they are an export economy. They don't want to see the world go into recession because they want all of us buying their stuff, right? So they don't like that at all. In addition, they have very extensive relationships with all of the Gulf states. And so the fact that the Gulf states are hurting, the fact that they can't both export to and import from the Gulf states, that's all bad for them. That said, they do have a relationship with the Iranians. The Iranians cut them a sweetheart deal, right? The Chinese buy pretty much all of the smuggled Iranian oil, and the Chinese get it at a discount, right? Because that's how they are able to justify it. They can strong-arm the Iranians into giving them a very nice, about a 10% discount, which, is a lot of money for the Chinese. In addition, the Chinese don't like seeing us throw our military weight around. And in particular, they don't like it when we threaten regime change in autocratic countries, because they assume that at some point we're going to try to do it to them. So for China, they have a very, very mixed set of incentives with this. And really what they'd like is they'd like this thing to just end where it is, which is why the Pakistanis were the country that came forward and brokered the ceasefire and have been trying to broker peace, right? Because the Pakistanis, their closest relationship is with China. And it's very clear that the Chinese are using the Pakistanis as their stalking horse to try to get this thing ended. Now, again, at some level, we can all say peace is always wonderful, peace is what we should be hoping for, but we need to remember so many of the other points that I was making in response to the questions that the rabbi was asking me. At the end of the day, the question is really going to be, what does the world look like when this war ends? Does this war end with an Iranian regime, or this version of the Iranian regime, which is worse than the one that we start out with, believing that they won, and believing that they can threaten the Strait of Hormuz whenever they want to, and get whatever they want from it? That would be a terrible outcome. That would be a horrible outcome for the United States, for all of our allies in the Middle East, and ultimately including the state of Israel as well. That would be worse than renewed war, right? And we have to think about that, that on the one hand, we all want peace, but is it going to be a lasting and durable peace, a peace that actually benefits the United States and our allies, or are we handing a victory to the worst country that we can think of?
So, to me, the survivability of Israel is more important, and the elimination of anti-Semitism is up there as well. So these kinds of discussions, they're really tactical, and they almost at a level that suggests that there isn't a deeper problem for us. And that's the one I really am most interested in asking you about. If you go back to October 7th, with Hamas doing what it did, why did they do that? And who was behind it? Clearly it was the Iranians, and clearly it was the deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Iran did not want to see any kind of peace between Israel and the Arab countries, the Abraham Accord. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. And at that time, the big issue was Palestinian state. Nothing was going to happen unless there was a Palestinian state. It was the end of the world, right, for Israel. In the hour that we have been discussing things here, this has not come up at all. All of a sudden, this issue that was so important, and Israel had to give up something to create a Palestinian state, we're not even talking about that now, right? We're talking about the Straits of Hormuz, right? And so, to me, it always comes back to why are we in this predicament? And what is it about what Israel is doing and needs to do? For me, I think that the survivability of Israel is most critical. So having someone who lobs these missiles at them and sends Hezbollah or Hamas or Houthis or what, look what's happened in Syria. It's quiet. Syria was a major problem. The Russians were a major problem because, why? Because Trump pulled out 50 US soldiers from a base and the Russians came in, right?
Which I'm not sure what your question
Well,
is.
I kind of went a little bit into Syria as well. I'm saying there are a lot of different things that are happening here. My biggest issue is how do we make sure that Israel survives, that the Israeli people do not get bombed by missiles, right, and are not threatened, and have an opportunity to do the peace with the other Arab states as they were planning to do. Now, you can go into all sorts of details about Bibi and what he took and the money from Qatar and paying Hamas and keeping him quiet, but the plan was to make peace with these Arab countries.
Okay. So I think the way that I'm going to try to get at that is to distinguish between Israel's long-term survival and its short-term survival. Because in the short term, the survival of the state is guaranteed. There's no country right now in the Middle East, frankly anywhere, that has the capacity or the desire to destroy the state of Israel. There are some countries that have the desire, but they lack the capacity. There are some countries that have the capacity, but they lack the desire. From my perspective, the bigger question is the longer term one. And it's less about the survival of the state per se, because first, Israel has an incredibly resourceful and committed populace, tremendously strong armed forces, and because of its incredible populace, it's likely to have extremely formidable armed forces for a long time. And I am literally not allowed to say that Israel has nuclear weapons, but I know that there are a lot of other people who go around saying that Israel has nuclear weapons. And I know that there are a lot of countries who believe that Israel has nuclear weapons. From my perspective, the question is really about what kind of Israel are we going to have in the future? Is it going to be an isolated and embattled Israel? Or is it going to be an Israel that is prosperous and integrated into the global economy and into an integrated Middle East? That's what we were headed for, right? We can argue about when it started to fray and whether it ended on October 7, 2023 or some prior date. But that's really what we were headed for. And whenever I was in Israel, you could feel it. You could feel how Israelis were feeling more and more accepted in Europe, in Asia. They were just part of the global world, the globalized world, right? It was a wonderful feeling for them. They were leaving the troubles of the Middle East behind them. That was at least the sense. And I absolutely agree with your point that that is exactly what Hamas was attacking on October 7, 2023, and no question the Iranians were part of that equation, and so were Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Hashid and all of those other groups, because that was a threat to them. Right? And from my perspective, again, go back to the point that I made, that the purpose of a war is to create a better peace afterwards. What I want to get back to is that Israel that once again is prosperous and increasingly accepted into the world. And I do very much worry, exactly as I suspect the rabbi does, I assume this is part of the question that you put to me. I worry that what's going on here in the United States is going to make that much harder afterwards. And I worry that what is happening in Europe is going to make that harder afterwards. And I worry that what's going on in the Arab world is going to make that harder afterwards. And to me, that's where we have to focus our efforts. And so again, as we think about what we're doing toward Iran, and I'll take your point that what we're doing with Iran is ultimately a tactical issue. I agree with that. This is my point as well, that we have to think strategically about the world afterwards, that we not lose sight of that, right? And again, from my perspective, while it's important that Iran's ballistic missile capability be set back so that they can't threaten Israel in the immediate term, what's more important to me is that we ensure that Israel not do things that make it harder for them to get back to where they were, to increasingly accepted, toward the startup nation that was the marvel of the rest of the world, right? Because ultimately that is going to be what is best for Israel in the long term and best for the U.S.-Israel relationship in the long term. And we can't lose sight of that, even as we think about, okay, which targets are we going to hit today and how important is it to destroy this factory or that factory?
For like 3 last questions. So, Michael,
I agree,
Craig,
that was a good
David.
point. I'm going to go a completely different way. Two quick questions. One question is the UAE-Saudi relationship with the UAE pulling out of OPEC recently and how that develops. The second question is, you mentioned Pakistan being the intermediary. It was not that long ago when we were very upset with the Pakistanis for promoting nuclear weapons in the rest of the world. Haven't they just taught people that the way to survive is to have a nuclear weapon?
So yes, to your second point, that's an easy one. Yes, Pakistan, if you're the Iranians, and they will point to this publicly, who gets attacked by the United States of America? Iraq, Iran. Who doesn't get? North Korea, Pakistan. What's the difference? Nuclear weapons, no nuclear weapons, right? This is easy math. With regard to your first question about the Saudis and the Emiratis, so yes, there is a pretty significant rift between the Saudis and the Emiratis, and it seems to be getting worse, not better. And I see this as very problematic. And again, in some ways, it comes back to these questions about Israel, because increasingly you have folks both in the region and in my world, the rest of the world that deals with the Middle East, talking about a new set of alliances emerging after this war, right? With Iran very much down, badly beaten up and bruised. The alliances that people are talking about are the Emirates, Israel, and India on one side, and Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey on the other, right? A little bit, not quite, because the Shia are mostly just out, right? The Iranians, Hezbollah, Lebanon, they're out, right? This is really about different tastes of Sunni. But again, it's not really Sunni Shia anymore because the Iranians are so down. And that's the point. You're now seeing what you would consider a split within the Sunni camp. But again, this is terrible, right? This is, having the, yes, it's great that Israel has such a great relationship with the Emirates, and India is also, a rising power. That's great too. But having them on the other side of the Saudis, the Egyptians, that's not a good answer, right? We should be looking to, again, keep the alliance of all of us against the Iranians. That's a much better alliance. And so the split between the Saudis and the Emiratis, and again, they're two very good friends of the United States, very important friends. And that split it's very problematic. And again, it's one that's getting ignored because of the Iran war, right? And the focus on the Iran war. And there are a lot of people saying, well, they're now on the boat, both of them against the Iranians, so it's going to paper over things. I don't see that. In fact, what I see is the exact opposite, and some of you are probably aware that the Emiratis just withdrew from OPEC. And, okay, people have been talking about that for a long time. I've been getting asked, are the Emiratis going to pull out of OPEC for years now? But in every case, I said, not yet, because they're still getting stuff and they don't want to break with the Saudis. It's important for them not to do so. The fact that they did it is very important. And they're talking about pulling out of the Arab League and the Organization of the Islamic Conference, right? Kind of just demonstrating their willingness to pull away from Saudi leadership in the Arab world. And again, that's going to be tough for us to negotiate. And for those of us in this room who believe in the U.S.-Israel relationship, we don't want Israel to be on one side with the Emirates and the Saudis to be on a different side from that. That's not good for Israel.
You've talked about the uncertainty about how this war will end and whether or not we'll come out better afterwards, as you've defined better. What is your level of confidence that it will turn out when the war ends, that things will be better rather than worse? What is your level of confidence?
So a little bit higher today than it was a week ago. I think I've been waiting for the U.S. Navy to start or to signal that it feels comfortable sending commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. And sending the two ships through, I guess it was yesterday, I think it was a very important signal. Because from my perspective, that is a really important element of not handing a victory to this leadership in Tehran, right? They can't believe that they can close the strait and we can't reopen it. That would be disastrous. Now again, we're not there yet. We're not out of the woods, right? We got 2 American ships through, and the Iranians attacked and at least did a tremendous amount of damage. I don't know if the ship is sunk or not, but a South Korean ship got hit by the Iranians, right? So, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, almost literally. But nonetheless, the more that we are able to start bringing ships through the Strait of Hormuz, demonstrating that the Iranians can't stop it, it's a very important step forward. It's a very important step toward demonstrating to the Iranians themselves and the rest of the world that they didn't win, that they can't close the strait whenever they want to, that in fact we can reopen it whenever we need to. So, as I said, a little bit more confident, but as I said, we're also not out of the woods. They are going to attack all kinds of other ships. The fact that they were able to hit the South Korean ship is not a good thing. And of course, you may also know they started lobbing ballistic missiles at the United Arab Emirates again, right? And again, demonstrating to the Gulf states and to us, we have other ways to hurt you, right? And that too is a very bad outcome for us. We can't end this war with the Iranians and the Gulf states and every investor everywhere believing that the Iranians could start lobbing ballistic missiles and drones at the Gulf states whenever they wanted to, and there's nothing that anyone could really do about it. Again, that would destroy the economies of the Gulf states. They're not going to allow that to happen. So again, they will start paying off the Iranians to prevent that from happening, which again is disastrous, right? You do not want to start paying off a blackmailer. It only causes them to come back for more and more and more. And by the way, that is who the Iranians are, right? Let's not mince words. The Iranians are an extortion ring. All of these people they imprison in avian prison, including dear friends of mine, they do that for money, okay? They ransom them for money. That is who this regime is. Right? And we shouldn't, they get billions, we should not allow them to get tens or hundreds of billions. They will not put that to good use.
David gets the last question.
All right. Your last answer set this up perfectly. While we've been sitting here, Operation Freedom, helping the ships...
Project Freedom?
Yeah, has been put on pause. So Trump's been calling Putin, asking for whatever he's asking Putin for. If his next call were to Pollack...
I'm sorry.
If his next call were to Pollack...
To me. Oh, this Pollack.
Yes.
Not Sydney because he wanted to see Tootsie again.
No. This Pollack.
Okay. What would I say? What would I do?
What's your... How do we get to where we need to be?
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think my first answer is give $50 billion to DARPA, have them build a time machine, go back to February 28th, and don't do this. If he doesn't accept that answer, my answer is we absolutely need to make clear to the Iranians that we can reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force, that they do not get to close the Strait of Hormuz. For me, that is non-negotiable. And by the way, that may require putting ground troops on the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz. Again, I'm one of these people, you've heard any number of us quoted in magazines, newspapers, TV, internet. I've been involved in the planning and the exercises and the war games for what do you do if the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz for 34, 35 years. And what was always interesting about those war games is we always won, right? We always cleared the Strait of Hormuz. We always did it in 2 or 3 weeks. And so when this all started, my answer to everyone was, yeah, okay, take 2 or 3 weeks, but we'll do this. And 2 or 3 weeks went by, we hadn't done it. And so I started asking myself the question of, well, why hadn't we done it? And kind of like thinking back, and I realized that in all of those war games, there were some important things different. One, we didn't start the fight, the Iranians did, so the world was with us. And that also meant that, 2, we had all those European minesweepers that I talked about. Okay. And 3, we always deployed ground troops, right? Because again, the feeling was this is too important to not use all of our military capabilities to make sure that this, and the American people would be behind it, because again, the Iranians would have started it. That's not the war we're in right now. But I nonetheless do believe that we cannot end this war with the Iranians believing that they can shut down the Strait of Hormuz whenever they choose to do so. And again, for me, this is awful. That's why and by the way, I was saying this from the get-go, this is not a good idea, right? I know we're going to do a lot of damage to the Iranians, and that's a great thing, but at the end of the day, we're going to wind up in a very problematic set of circumstances because of how we got into this. And that's exactly where we are. And so I increasingly feel, and again, that's why I'm hoping that this blockade is going to work. I don't give it a high likelihood, but I'm hoping. And because my fear is that if it doesn't work, we're going to be faced with 2 awful choices. Either we make concessions to the Iranians and end the war on their terms, or we put ground troops, at least on the northern littoral of the Strait of Hormuz, and that's going to be awful too.
Well, I hope you'll join me in thanking Dr. Ken Pollock. I don't think any of us came here expecting solutions and bright, rainbows, but you certainly provided a great deal of edification and context, global context, to this war and where it might lead. We're so grateful that you were with us here tonight. Ann and Peter, thank you for being here with us this evening as well. As you all know, throughout this month, we have a whole range of events, programs, courses on the Middle East, Israel, Zionism. I know you'll be joining us for many of those. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and we will all see you soon.
Thank you all very much.
Yes, this has been, Sean says this has been recorded and will be available on our website. Is that right? Yes, he's saying yes. Excellent.